Hello and welcome to the How Do I video series for Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2. My name is Vlad Prekup and I am Microsoft Dynamics NAV software engineer. Throughout this video, I will show you how you can easily enable single sign-on with your Office 365 web applications in Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2. In the online services world, user authentication plays a very important role. While securing the application and user's data, it can also become a burden for the user if not managed correctly. For example, a user that uses multiple services needs to remember and enter his or her credentials for each of these services. Furthermore, service owners need to have their own identity management logic built into their web applications, which can lead to usability problems as well as security issues. Windows Azure Active Directory solves all these problems and even more by providing a centralized cloud-based identity management system which enables user authentication capabilities in a uniform manner for all the applications and services which integrate with it. Users signing into one service which provides Azure Active Directory-based authentication will not be required to sign in again for other applications that have Azure Active Directory authentication capabilities. Thus, a single sign-on experience is achieved, as we are going to see next in this video. The objective of this video is to enable a single sign-on experience for Stan, our SMB owner, who runs his business on Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2 and uses Office 365 web applications. Let's see how the flow will look like in the end. I'm going to start Internet Explorer and navigate to the O365 portal. Next, I'm going to use Stan's credentials for signing in. And now I'm in the portal. Let's navigate to Stan's mailbox. We can already see the smooth transition between these two services where there was no need for Stan to reconfirm or re-enter his credentials. Now let's assume that we have just deployed Dynamics NAV 2013 R2 and sent an email with a web client portal address to Stan's inbox. So let's click on this address, and this will take us directly to the Dynamics NAV web client portal. Notice that we were not asked for any credentials since the browser now passed the authentication cookies to the sign-in endpoint automatically. Now let's look the other way around. Let's sign out from the Dynamics NAV web client and close the browser windows. Now let's restart Internet Explorer and paste the address of the web client portal. Notice the different sign-in page this time. This is the web page that Azure Active Directory displays for applications which integrate it in the authentication process. Since we were not signed in anymore, our credentials are asked for, so let's type them in again. And now we are back into the web client. Let's navigate to the O365 portal. Again, there is no need for us to re-enter our credentials. Throughout this scenario, we have seen the power of single sign-on and how it provides a uniform and more pleasant experience to the users by only asking them for the credentials the first time they access the service, while cutting out the need for service or application developers to provide and secure their own user authentication mechanism. So let's see what needs to be done in order to enable this scenario. Please note that the steps performed in this video are a prerequisite for another how-to video presented by Christian Heidedem throughout which he explains how Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2 can be integrated into a SharePoint site. In order for you to perform the steps in this video, you will need to have the following components set up. A Microsoft Dynamics NAV web client installation on a public domain linked to a server and a database. In my case, the client is deployed on a Windows Azure VM. Furthermore, you need to have a security certificate configured for the client-server communication. You can find how this can be done in the How to Implement Security Certificates in a Production Environment topic from the Microsoft Dynamics NAV help. The second thing that you need is an active Microsoft Office 365 subscription with the administrator account already set up. You can sign up for a trial Office 365 subscription at this location. Furthermore, the subscription automatically provides a new Azure Active Directory tenant which can be managed via an Azure subscription. This tenant will contain the actual user accounts created through the Office 365 portal or through the Windows Azure subscription. Now, in order for you to have an overview of the deployment model, I'll show what we have so far. You can notice how the Office 365 services are already linked to the Windows Azure Active Directory tenant. From here, we need to connect the Microsoft Dynamics NAV deployment to the Azure Active Directory tenant owned by Stan. It is worth noting that for simplicity reasons, we assume that Stan is also the service owner, so he has access to all the components in this diagram. We will enable this scenario in 4 main steps. First, we are going to create a Windows Azure subscription and then configure Microsoft Dynamics NAV Web Client as an application in the Azure Active Directory tenant. Second, we will create a user account into the Microsoft Dynamics NAV database. Then we will configure the Microsoft Dynamics NAV server. And then, lastly, we will configure Microsoft Dynamics NAV Web Client. In the first step, we are going to sign up for a Windows Azure subscription using Stan's organizational account that he acquired from the Office 365 subscription. So I'm going to start by opening Internet Explorer and navigating to the Azure Management Portal. We would like to sign in using the Office 365 organizational account that Stan has. So I'm going to enter his email address here. Here on this page, we will see that no subscription is associated to the user account. So what we want to do is click on the sign up for Windows Azure, and we will be redirected to the sign up page for a free trial subscription for Windows Azure. Once you fill in the requested information and agree to the Windows Azure agreement, you just need to sign up, and your Windows Azure subscription is going to be created. Now we can see that the free trial subscription is active. So now we can navigate to the Windows Azure Management Portal. On the left-hand side of the screen, we will notice a section called Active Directory, so let's click on it since we're interested in it for this scenario. And let's click on this default directory. And here you can see all these subsections. Just to make sure Stan is in here, let's click on the users. And you can see that Stan's account is already there. Now let's continue with the applications. Each application that performs federated user authentication with a certain Azure Active Directory tenant needs to establish a trust relationship with it. Thus, we need to add a reference to the Microsoft Dynamics NAV Web Client application in the Azure Active Directory tenant. We do this by clicking the Add button in the bottom of the screen. Now we need to name our application. We can name it NAV Web Client and then advance to the next section. Next, we need to provide the app URL. So we simply copy the address to our Microsoft Dynamics NAV Web Client and paste it here. This will be copied over to the reply URL, and it will be used by Azure Active Directory in order for it to know where it should send back the security token after the authentication process has been performed. The next field, the app ID URI, is a unique identifier for the application within this AAD tenant, so we can also paste the same value here. We only need single sign-on permissions for this app, so now we can proceed. Once the application is created, it will show up into the applications list. So let's click on it. If you press the configure link here at the top, you will be able to see and change all the parameters that we've entered in the previous steps. Let's scroll down, and you'll notice that the reply URL is now in place. I will show you one more detail here. Let's click on the View Endpoints button from the bottom of the page. Here you will see all the endpoints that Azure Active Directory exposes to apps for integration purpose. Throughout this demo, we will use two of them, the Federation metadata document and the WS Federation sign-on endpoint. Now we are completely done with configuring Azure Active Directory, and we only need to configure Microsoft Dynamics NAV to make use of the Azure Active Directory for user authentication. In step 2, we are going to create a new NAV user account and assign Stan's Office 365 email address to this user account. We are also going to assign permissions for this account. In order to create a new user account, we need to navigate to the Dynamics NAV Role Center. From here, we will open the users list and create a new user account. We'll name it Stan and scroll down to the Office 365 Authentication Fast tab. In the Authentication email field, we're going to enter Stan's Office 365 email. You'll notice that when we tab away from this field, the authentication status is going to change, since Stan has not authenticated to NAV yet. Next, we'll assign the super permission for this user account, but for the Cronus International Limited Company. Once we've done this, we can close the card and confirm the dialog, since we haven't entered the NAV user password credentials for the user. You can also do these steps using the following PowerShell commands. In step 3, we're going to configure the NAV server by setting the user authentication type and the Federation metadata location. In order to configure the Dynamics NAV server to allow federated authentication with Azure Active Directory, we need to connect to the machine where the server is hosted. Next, we're going to start the Dynamics NAV management tool. We're going to use this tool in order to change the following server settings. The first setting that we need to change is the credential type. We're going to set this to Access Control Service. The next server setting that we need to change is the federation metadata location. We can get this value from the Azure Management Portal as I've shown you before, but we can also just use the template right here in the description. Notice that you can choose between the Azure Active Directory tenant ID and the Azure Active Directory tenant domain, or something.onmicrosoft.com. AAD knows to map this to the tenant ID. We're going to choose the latter, and we're going to copy this template to a new Notepad document. Paste it here, and replace this placeholder with our tenant domain. Now we're going to select the entire URI, copy it, and paste it into the configuration tool. We can save the settings now. Now the server is set for Azure Active Directory authentication, so we just need to restart it for the settings to take effect. In the last step, we're going to configure the NAV web client to allow federated authentication with Azure Active Directory. Let's go back to the remote machine where the Dynamics NAV services are hosted. Then let's just start Internet Information Services and see where the web server resides in order for us to open the configuration settings file. Let's expand the Sites node and explore the Instance1 node. Here we're going to have to find the web.config file, which we will open using Notepad. Now let's scroll down to the configuration setting related to credential type. Let's copy the access control service and paste it in here. Next, we're going to scroll down to ACS URI. Notice that we have a sample URI just above, so we can copy and paste that in. In this case, we point to the Azure Active Directory Federated Authentication endpoint for our tenant. Again, we can just enter our tenant domain instead of the tenant ID. Also notice the wsignin and wtrealm query string parameters. The wtrealm parameter must identify an application in AAD, so we must enter exactly the same value as the app ID URI that we have just entered when creating the application in the Azure Management Portal. I have saved this value in a Notepad document, so I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. Now I'm going to save the document, and IIS detects that I've changed the configuration setting, so we can just try this out now. For that, we'll start the Internet Explorer browser and navigate directly to the Dynamics NAV web client address. I'm going to paste that in. And notice that now we are redirected to the Azure Active Directory specific sign-in page. So let's just enter Stan's credentials. And sign in. Now we are redirected to the Dynamics NAV Role Center. So let's also check the single sign-on capabilities. For that, I'm going to navigate from here directly to the Office 365 administration portal. and we are redirected to the portal automatically. So now single sign-on is set. We have a fully working deployment of NAV Web Client which uses federated authentication with Azure Active Directory. Let's revisit the steps that we have performed in order to enable this scenario. In step 1, we have configured the Azure Active Directory tenant of the Office 365 subscription to allow federated authentication of external applications. In step 2, we have created a new NAV user account and linked the Office 365 email address to this user account. In step 3, we have configured the NAV server to support federated authentication, and in step 4, we have configured the NAV web client to support federated authentication. I look forward to see you again in another episode of our How Do I video series for Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2. This is Vlad Prekup. Thanks for watching.